Today I wanted to cover some of the differences between the X Windows system, that includes Xorg and X11, and even, the X Windows managers themselves. But I also want to compare that with Wayland. And the purpose of this is to give you the information that you need to determine whether or not you should be running X11 or Wayland. In 2022, that is. So to start with, we need to understand what a display server is. So a display server, that's a program where the primary task is to communicate the input and output of its clients and to send that input and receive the output to the rest of the operating system, the hardware, and even other clients. So the display server communicates with clients over a protocol called the display server protocol. And that protocol is written so that clients can be anywhere. They can be local to the machine. They can be out on a different machine and access through a network. So they can be anywhere. The display server is crucial in any graphical user interface, specifically those that are tied with windowing systems. It is the basic component of graphical user interfaces. Display server sits between the graphical user interface and the kernel. So that's where it lives. Don't confuse display server with KDE, GNOME, XFCE, because those are not display servers. They're desktop environments. They use the display server to paint themselves onto your screen, but they are not the display server itself. So we know that the display server communicates with clients over the display server protocol, but how does it do it? How many there are 3 protocols that are available in Linux. The first is X11, the second is Wayland, and the third is Ubuntu's Mirror. Mir. I'm not going to be covering Mir today. We have a number of components. So the first one, the overall one, is called the X Windows system. You could hear that sometimes referred to as X. The odd thing is that if you look up X window, you'll probably run into Microsoft Windows. Our search engines are not too good at discerning between the two. X is old. It is very old. The project started at MIT in 1984, and it became the default windowing system for most Unix-like operating systems. And then it became part of Linux as well. So as you can see here, it has a number of components. The first one would be the KMS doesn't refer to any part of, it has the eDevs and the kernel as one part. And then the X server is what communicates with devices and the X clients. Based on what the X clients do, the X server communicates with a separate thing called the compositor. And the compositor is what displays, it pushes the information that is changed onto the compositor. The compositor then pushes it back out to the display server, and then that transitions onto your device. So one of the deficiencies of the X Windows system is it was originally written for frame buffers. So typically you would have a foreground frame buffer and a background frame buffer. The foreground was the one that was actively being displayed, and the background was the one that was actively being built. So it would be the one that changed. The problem with X is that when the compositor runs, it's the entire display. It re-renders everything. That was the original design because it didn't know about graphics processors. Those simply didn't exist. And so you had frame buffers, and you might have found things like foreground store, background store. There was a lot of different tricks that were used to try to speed it up. Xorg Server is basically it's free and it's open source, and it's an implementation of the X Windows System Display Server. That piece of software is managed by the Xorg Foundation today. The Xorg Server, that's an application that interacts with the client applications via the X11 protocol to draw things and on the display and to send input events like I'm moving the mouse, I'm clicking the mouse, and I'm typing in things on my keyboard that need to appear or make interaction with the client on the back end. So X11, it's a network protocol. It's a very poor one because the reason why I say it's a very poor network protocol is because it has all this other baggage that it's carrying with it from its original design. So yeah, there's a lot of hacks in X11 that have kind of meant to bend it to working with modern display hardware that it was never intended to do. So yeah, you get into situations like that, and then all of a sudden the software is carrying a lot more bloat than it used to. So what does X11 do? So it describes how messages are exchanged between a client application, an X-client application, and the display server. And that allows them to understand each other. The X-client is saying, hey, I need to update the screen because I've pulled down a new window, I've entered some text in it, and I've clicked on a radio box. So all of that information needs to go back to the display server so it gets rendered and pushed back onto the display. So the messages typically carry some primitive drawing commands like draw the box, write these characters, maybe put another box with a check mark in it. So yeah, or if the mouse button has been clicked, there's usually some kind of animation that goes along with that to allow you to know that, hey, your mouse got clicked in the right spot, right? So X11 is also old. It first originated in actually 1986, but its first incantation that came out was in 1987. So there was some beta code that was done back in 1986, and then 1987 it became an official release. Yeah, it has become a pile of hacks, and it's sitting on a protocol that has not been overhauled, and it's badly needed to be overhauled for over 35 years. So that unfortunately would take a rewrite to do it, I'm afraid, because I doubt. I mean, there's not many of the original X11 developers that are still active writing code for it anymore. All of the work that X11 did was redelegated to individual applications and the window manager. It's all those old features, they're still there, and they're weighing down those applications, and they're interfering with performance. They also interfere with security. How does that do that? Well, as it turns out, X11 doesn't really care too much about protecting X clients from one another. So they'll let them talk to each other, or they'll allow data to be exchanged between them. It's one of the most notorious ways to exfiltrate information on Linux systems or even Unix systems. What the heck was X11 designed for anyway? It didn't originally understand. I mean, 3D graphics cards take on a lot of the processing, and they have a lot of intelligence. But X11 was written for a time when the devices were simple; they were dumb. This is an NCD terminal here that was commonly known as an X terminal. You might heard them be X11 terminals, but anyway, they used frame buffers, and they were so slow that the only thing they could run was the X client. This is the reason why the client server protocol got reversed on X. And what do I mean by reverse? Well, typically the server component is the portion that is receiving messages, providing processing, and then sending it back. But and now that means that if the X11 device was the server, as it should be, then there would be all this chatter that was going back and forth over the network every time you moved your mouse. So they moved the server to the terminal in order to minimize that chatter. And then the only thing that got exchanged was when it needed to update to get the display to re-render. So that was one of the reasons why. So the X client ran on the terminal, and the X server did all the heavy lifting for the rendering and compositing. And mainly because servers back then were faster. But all that has changed today. I mean, a lot of the systems that we have today, the PC clients are probably more powerful in terms of their graphics capabilities than the servers are. So much of what the original code was and isn't being used, but more or less it's still taking up space, plus much of what X11 does are hacks. And further, most of the games written for Linux, all are based on X11. So very few of them use Wayland, if any at all. X11 and Xorg do receive regular updates and patches. In fact, the last one was, I think, a couple of days ago. So yeah, I mean, there isn't any active development going on as far as major changes to the X11 or Xorg protocol. So there has been talk about X12 and X12. Some of the talk has been about revamping X11 and taking some of the code out that is pretty much garbage and trash, and then trying to work on some of the security pieces, but that's never, to my knowledge, has never gained traction within Xorg, the Xorg Foundation, to get it moving. And most of the activities today with the Xorg Foundation have to do more with administrative and licensing type of activities. They do not seem to have any active desire to do anything to improve it. So, enter Wayland. Wayland was begun by Christian Hogsberg, an Xorg developer, as a personal project in 2008. And it's a communication protocol that specifies communication between the display server and the clients. So Wayland is actually a display server, but it also contains a compositor built into it. So it doesn't need a separate one. Wayland is developed free and open source community-driven project. Its design is to replace the X Windows system. That includes both the X11 and the Xorg parts with a modern, secure, and more straightforward windowing system. So it's meant to streamline it, make it faster, make it more secure. And the reason, some of the things that Wayland does is that it isolates the X clients from each other, or its clients from each other. So, yeah, so they cannot communicate unless there are provisions made in order to exchange data safely. So, the display protocol does not allow it. So you have to use some other external mechanism to do that. The compositor is a window manager, and that provides applications with off-screen buffers for each window. So now Wayland can update exactly what needs to be updated, a true compositor. So it doesn't have to refresh the entire window or the entire screen. It can just refresh the portions of it that need to change. That's a more modern approach, and that reduces some of the chatter that has to go on back and forth. The window manager composites the window buffers into an image representing the screen and then writes the result into the display memory. And then that is what you see. What you see is what you get. Wayland's main advantage over X is that it starts from scratch. It doesn't have any baggage that it's carrying along with it. So, but that also has some problems, right? And we'll get into that. Wayland is superior when it comes to security. When with X, it's possible to do something called keyboard logging by allowing any program to exist in the background and read what's happening on the other windows that are opening and closing and doing stuff in the X11 area. You can't do that in Wayland. That's not allowed. One of the things that, and this is going to bring back that problem, but One of the things that Wayland has done is added a component called the XWayland system. XWayland is software which allows X11 applications to communicate directly with Wayland, but it's using the Wayland protocol to do it. So you gain the advantages somewhat of the Wayland protocol, but yet you're able to continue to use applications that have not yet moved to support Wayland. So, and XWayland is not an emulator. If it was, we would have a full implementation of X11 in it. Instead, it's a translator. It translates X11 communications into Wayland and then allows those to run. So, if you are interested in that, you can go out to their documentation page, and there's a much longer, it's called the Wayland Project, and if you go out there, you'll see a much longer explanation of the X11 interfaces that are there. Wayland has been around for some time now, but not all is rosy with it. There are still a number of applications that refuse to work with it. One of the ones is the screen recorder app. Under Linux, they have not ported it. I don't know if they ever will over to Wayland. There is support now in KDE for Wayland, but it is not complete. Well, let me put it this way. Now, there's a couple of devs that do watch this channel that are from the KDE, and so I'm going to ask them, is that documentation on your website accurate? Because it says that it is not complete yet. There are still some issues. But yes, KDE is building in support for Wayland. GNOME is feature complete as far as I know. But there's still bugs in the code in Wayland, and there's some areas which simply do not work as the X11 protocol does, or work as well. The other problem is there's a lot of the games that are being written for Linux or have the translators for Windows in them. Those are all X11 based. So yeah, you still have some issues where Wayland just won't run games either. So, but the ones that it does run, it runs very well. Wayland, on the other hand, fixes some of the security issues that X11 inherently carries. Plus, Wayland also has a lot less latency. And Phoronix out, I think it was a few years ago, where he tested Wayland against X11 using games, and there was some GTK performance tools and also the graphics performance set, where he actually went through and looked. Now, there were some areas where X11 was faster than Wayland, but for the most part, Wayland was quite significantly faster than X11. So what are my final thoughts? So here's what I think. So I think Wayland is the future. I just don't think that's in 2022. I mean, yeah, you'll run into enough frustration with Wayland that you'll roll back to X11. Chances are, and that's unfortunate. It is getting better. I mean, Wayland is getting better. It's a lot better today than it was. So it is getting better steadily, and some of the problems are starting to disappear. But nonetheless, there's some applications that you may try to run that aren't going to work. And you can try the XWayland interface and see if that will help, at least in trying to get your existing X11 applications to work. So with that, that's all I had for today. I hope you enjoyed this brief look at X11 versus Wayland and kind of what my thoughts are on it. Hope to see y'all again real soon, and bye for now.